Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the results of the vote are in. Well, some of them. We'll hash out what we know about California's election results. We'll also consider what all these recent large tech layoffs reveal about our economic outlook. Plus, we visit lovely Lake Merritt in tonight's edition of Something Beautiful. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, November 11th, 2022. Hello and welcome. This is KQED Newsroom, and I'm Priya David Clemens. There have been a lot of shakeups this week between the economic news and newly elected political leadership. We're going to start this evening with the elections. Nationally, control of Congress still hangs in the balance. In California, we have clear winners and losers on ballot propositions, but many elected leadership positions remain undecided. I am joined now by KQED politics and government reporter Guy Marzorati. Guy, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
So we've talked a lot about the competitive congressional races here in California and how they could impact the balance of power in Washington. What did we see this week?
Well, as we sit here on Friday, we still don't know how a lot of these seats in California are going to turn out. We think Republicans are in good position in a number of these swing seats in California, but there are just so many votes left to be counted in the state. If you ask the question, why don't we know the balance of power in the House nationally? The answer is because of California. We had all of these swing districts going into this election, and so many of them are still undecided.
You know, I want to zero in particularly on, say, David Valadao. We saw a lot of races across the country in which President Trump had thrown his power and his weight behind certain candidates, but they didn't do as well as expected. And here in California, in the Central Valley, David Valadao was looking to be reelected, and he was one who voted to impeach President Trump. Do you think that helped him, hurt him? I mean, what happened? I mean, that was really back in the primaries.
Right. I mean, I think in a swing district, it does help someone like Valadao. He has this reputation as being unafraid to maybe buck President Trump. But think nationally, so many of the, candidates who ran in Republican primaries who won with the support of President Trump just weren't palatable to independent voters when it came to November. And I think that is a trend worth watching going into 2024. The Valadao district specifically, there's still so many votes to be counted. The Associated Press says just about 42% of votes have been counted in that district. So that's going to be one. Valadao is leading Rudy Salas, but that's going to be one to watch in the coming days.
All right, so we'll keep our eyes on that. Anything else in California in terms of congressional races that you think you're really keeping an eye on?
I mean, so many of them are so close right now. Katie Porter running for re-election in Orange County, a Democratic star over the last few years.
Major fundraiser.
Major fundraiser. I mean, that race is incredibly close. And I think, with so many of these seats up in the balance, Mike Levin in San Diego County, same thing, very close race at this point. There's just, ballots are going to continue to come in California. The Secretary of State says almost 5 million ballots left to be counted statewide. So just, election day turns into election week.
Well, we did have a lot more ballots going out by mail because for the first time, California mandated that every registered voter got a ballot by mail. So how is that playing into this slowness of vote counting?
Well, I think it definitely, writ large, the changes that state leaders here have made in California to increase access to the ballot have made it a longer vote counting process. You take the fact that you can register to vote on election day, right? You can come in to the polls. There's an online registration deadline, but you can show up, register, and vote conditionally. But when you vote, your registration has to be checked out. They have to make sure you're not registered somewhere else, and then make sure your vote is counted after that on a provisional ballot. There's also the fact that you can vote, mail in your ballot, and have it arrive up to a week after Election Day, as long as it's postmarked on Tuesday. And then also there's this process called ballot fixing, ballot curing, where...
Ballot fixing does not sound good. Let's talk about what that is.
Well, it's the curing. You sign your ballot envelope. If there's a mismatch, if it doesn't match up, there is a process by which even after Election Day, county officials can get in touch and say, hey, this doesn't match the signature. That's often the one you have on your driver's license. We're going to give you a chance to, fix it and make sure that it's actually you casting that ballot. So all those changes that were put in place to make it easier to cast ballots, to get more people to the polls, the trade-off is we do just have a longer process of processing and counting ballots here in California.
And we have had pretty good turnout so far from what we're seeing for a midterm election.
That's right. And I think nationally Democratic turnout was very strong for a midterm in which Democrats controlled power in Washington. I think you've seen Democratic energy throughout leading up to the general election in this year, but I also think it's kind of a trend in the Trump era of politics. You have increased partisanship, but also increased engagement. People care about politics really like never before in this country. You add that on top of all these changes made to make it easier to vote, the increase of vote by mail, and I think what you really have is an increased floor for both parties in elections. You saw this in 2018. Democrats were incredibly motivated, but after the Kavanaugh hearings, so were Republicans, and they turned out and flipped 2 Senate seats. You saw it in 2020 where Democratic voters couldn't wait to get President Trump out of office, but Republicans were also incredibly motivated and gained in the House of Representatives. And then you're seeing it this year. All the kind of things leading up to the election, the fundamentals were in Republicans' favor: an unpopular president, a shaky economy. But the fact that Democrats were so motivated after the Dobbs decision and stayed motivated through November really limited the amount of gains that Republicans were able to make.
And very high voter turnout among young people as well. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening with the candidates here in the Bay Area. So here in the Bay Area, writ large, we generally have this sort of gap between moderates and progressives, right? Not so much the conservative side. Did that grow? Did that shrink? What happened?
Yeah, we're not talking about Democratic and Republican splits here in the Bay Area. This moderate progressive business labor gap is something we've watched election after election here. And I think largely if you look across the Bay Area, there were a lot of labor-backed, maybe more progressive candidates who got a lot of money but did not succeed on election night. We're looking at races for the mayor of Oakland where Sheng Tao is behind, mayor of San Jose where Cindy Chavez trails.
And let's just to dive into that for a second. In Oakland, still not called, right? We've got Lauren Taylor out ahead, but still no final count.
Still no final count. Both candidates are saying they want to, wait as more ballots come in. That's a ranked choice process again. So there's both the first place votes that get counted and then the ranked choice tally, the votes redistributed in that instant runoff. Same thing with San Jose. That race is neither candidate has called it or conceded it. But we do see Matt Mahan gaining votes every day. He looks to be in really good position. And in San Francisco, you saw a number of moderate supervisors fare pretty well on the ballot.
And here in San Francisco, that was really sort of a vindication for Mayor London Breed, right, who has been saying we're going to be a little tougher on crime. Seems like she has been pushing that line harder. And
it seemed like she was not on the ballot, but she had a pretty good night on the ballot, I think we could say. Her appointed district attorney won her election. She had supervisors that she was backing do well. She had the 3 school board members who she appointed earlier this year succeed on the ballot. So overall, a good night for the mayor.
And tell us what's happening in San Jose, because this has been a very contentious race. And Matt Mahan kind of came out of nowhere, and it seems like he has done very, very well for himself.
That's right. It was just 2 years ago he won political office for the first time, winning a seat on the city council. And he stayed so focused throughout this campaign on his message of change. It was clear both candidates felt like voters wanted change, and Mahan was the one who was able to really stick to that message. Chavez, who has been in local government for the better part of 25 years, had a hard time making that argument. She tried to say, look, Mahan is too close to the current mayor, Sam Liccardo, but it seemed like Mahan's constant focus on shaking up city government may have really resonated with voters. The challenge now is he is going to be, still in city government. He's going to be the mayor. San Jose is a weak mayor system. You're just one vote on the council. How does he consistently get 6 votes on a council where so many of the incumbents did not support him in this race?
Time to say, hey, buddy, come on over.
Right, right. All is
forgiven. Let's do a little business.
Yeah.
Okay, let's head down south and talk about the LA mayor's race. Not a direct impact to us here in the Bay Area, but obviously interesting and obviously of import to the state of California writ large. So Karen Bass versus Rick Caruso, another election that has not yet been completed yet.
Right, an incredibly close race at this point. Rick Caruso has led coming out of Election Day, but so many votes still to be counted in Los Angeles. And on Thursday night, Karen Bass actually put out a statement saying she thinks she's going to win this race when all the ballots are being counted. She feels confident that the ballots, arriving on Election Day, maybe arriving after Election Day, will swing in her favor.
So she says that. What do you, Guy Marzorati, political analyst, think?
I think generally the trend we expect to see is the more late arriving votes skew more progressive. Ballots that are, either dropped off at polling places or voting locations on Election Day, or ones that are arriving in the mail after that. But so many, I think maybe over 1 million at this point, votes left to count in Los Angeles, so this could drag on for a while.
Let's let's talk about something that can seem a little wonky politically, but redistricting, maybe even gerrymandering. How did that play out across the nation and here in California?
Well, I think across the nation, you look at states like Wisconsin, the way in which seats are gerrymandered, basically lines drawn to favor explicitly one political party, did limit the kind of gains that Democrats would make. But we don't have that in California. We have an independent redistricting commission that draws a pretty fair map, fair lines, and as a result, we had so many competitive districts. I think it's one of the reasons California is perhaps the nation's top House battleground, is because of this independent redistricting process. We end up with so many competitive seats, and we're seeing that play out right now, where I think the Cook Political Report had 10 competitive House races in California. Only one has been called so far.
So do we get to pat ourselves on the back for doing a good
not?
job?
Why not? You know, I think
it's going to take a while.
You know, I think in this case, it was a process in which the commission listened to residents, kind of drew districts based on how communities interact with each other, where voters are, how they're living in their daily lives, rather than incumbent protection plan. And I think we're seeing kind of the fruits of that.
Is there a race you're really watching right now?
There is. It's a state Senate race in the South Bay and the East Bay. This district, District 10, running from about Hayward through Fremont, down to the South Bay, San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale. This is one that's incredibly close. It's another kind of moderate versus progressive labor business proxy war that we talked about earlier. In this case, you had nearly $5 million spent by outside interests just in the general election. Business groups getting behind Fremont Mayor Lily May, labor groups getting behind Hayward City Councilwoman Aisha Wahab. Right now, that race is like 300 votes apart. May leads right now. So that's just going to be one I'm really excited to see how it shakes out, because I do think you'd see really different choices being made by those two candidates in Sacramento, given kind of their backings, their constituencies in this race.
Okay, Guy, let's turn to housing. We saw it on ballots up and down the state. There were 52 ballot measures across California, 21 of them right here in the Bay Area. And we are joined now by KQED housing reporter Erin Baldassari, who wrote the definitive guide to how every single ballot measure fared here in our region on housing. So Erin, hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So tell us about sort of these main types of housing measures and what they looked like.
Yeah, as you said, there were a lot. And what's really interesting is that here in the Bay Area, what was facing voters was also facing voters across the state, with one exception, and that was the vacancy taxes. So there were measures in Berkeley, San Francisco, and sort of Bay Area adjacent Santa Cruz, asking voters to sort of penalize or add fees for property owners who keep their homes or apartments intentionally vacant for certain periods of time.
You know, they saw a lot of that during the pandemic, didn't we? That we felt like people were moving out, but then nobody was coming in because owners weren't really allowing that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a perception that this is a way that property owners kind of land bank. They're using property to, borrow against the equity, for example. But when you really dig into the numbers, you see that, there's lots of reasons why people have homes vacant. Maybe they're, waiting to rent it out. Maybe they're doing rehab. Maybe someone is, in an assisted living facility. So just a whole bunch of reasons. And it ends up not being that many homes that end up getting taxed by these measures. But I think it speaks to this frustration that people have, which is, why should any home sit vacant when we have so many people who don't have homes or are just really struggling to find an affordable place to live?
And how did those measures do?
Well, for the most part, pretty well. Berkeley and San Francisco look like they're passing. Not so much in Santa Cruz, and that's really interesting. I think people will be digging into why all that happened, but some different dynamics at play. Santa Cruz is more of a vacation destination. Maybe people have more, second homes there, that sort of thing, or renting them out for Airbnbs. But certainly, activists and politicians who are interested in implementing measures like this in their communities are really going to be looking at what worked and what didn't with those campaigns. And also whether these measures end up being effective in really getting property owners to put any vacant homes that they have onto the market, make sure they're rented out or sold.
And then we also saw density, rental caps.
Yeah, so tenant protections were big on the ballot across the state. In the Bay Area, we had a measure in Richmond that would further restrict how much landlords can raise the rent each year. In Oakland, there was a measure to expand tenant protections to more tenants, essentially. And those also did really well, and across the state did really well. So I think there's kind of a growing perception that, as it becomes harder to own a home in California, there's a growing recognition that, we need to make rental properties more stable for folks. Limit the reasons people can be evicted, limit how much they can be, their rent can increase every year, and just kind of giving renters and tenants the same stability that homeowners tend to have. And then you mentioned kind of changing the way that cities can approve new housing. So we had measures in Menlo Park, Brentwood, and San Francisco, all around that theme. In Menlo Park and Brentwood, they were measures that would ask voters to approve changes to what can be built in those cities. So in Menlo Park, that applied to single-family neighborhoods. In Brentwood, it applied to golf courses, parks, and open spaces. Really different dynamics at play in those two cities. The one in Brentwood did pass. That's a city that has, approved admittedly a lot of housing over the past number of years. Haven't seen as much job growth. The opposite situation in Menlo Park, enormous job growth with Meta headquartered there, and really haven't kept pace with housing. And so we saw voters reject that measure and say, no, we don't want to limit what can be built in single-family neighborhoods, or at least require a vote for that.
So as you look at housing overall, do you have a big takeaway from what you're seeing with these midterm results and what we should be thinking as we move forward over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of support up and down the state. One of the big takeaways for folks who are looking to the future in 2024 was really thinking about how do we lower the constitutional threshold required to approve these types of funding measures, at least as it applies to affordable housing. So a coalition of groups is looking at putting that constitutional amendment on the ballot, and we'll be seeing some other big measures related to housing in 2024. So this is all kind of a warm-up for 2 years from now.
Erin Baldassari, our housing reporter, Guy Marzorati, our KQED politics and government reporter. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you
so much.
Let's turn now to this topsy-turvy economic news. This week, Meta laid off 11,000 people. That is 13% of its workforce. This comes on the heels of larger layoffs at other technology companies, including Salesforce, Twitter, Lyft, and Stripe. Our next guest has been considering what these changes are telling us about our economic outlook. I'm joined now by MarketWatch senior reporter Levi Sumagaysay. Levi, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like we have been talking about being on the edge of a recession for months now. So what are we seeing with these economic changes, with these layoffs? Are we there? Are we looking at a recession?
Well, some CEOs think we're there, and other CEOs are preparing for a recession, and that's why these cuts are happening. Mark Zuckerberg, when he told Meta that he was going to be laying off 13% of employees, he said that that he overhired during the pandemic, and he's trying to return things back to normal. Different companies have different reasons for what they're doing. Lyft laid off 13% of its workforce as well. And Lyft has been under pressure for a long time to become profitable, and its stock has declined a lot this year, as has Meta's. So, different companies have different reasons for what they're doing, but yes, the recession is in the back of all those CEOs' minds.
And what may be to come.
Yeah.
So you have actually been looking at this historically as well and saying, how do these layoffs compare to past times where we have seen economic downturns? What have you found in comparison to, say, the Great Recession or even the dot-com bust?
Right. Yeah, so as of the end of October, there were about 26,000 layoffs in the tech sector. And just in the past couple of weeks, in November, I estimate maybe 20 to 25,000 more.
So we're 50,000 overall.
Yeah, so we're at about 50,000 overall, which is a lot less than in 2020 during the pandemic when 85,000 tech jobs were lost. But, we're sort of getting to the Great Recession levels, which was 65,000 tech jobs lost in 2008. And we're far away from the dot-com bust. That was over 150,000.
Okay.
So when you compare it to what happened before, we're not quite there, but everyone's trying to be cautious, and they're doing what they can to keep costs down.
And the reasons for these tech layoffs, as Mark Zuckerberg was saying, his predictions were rosier. How much of that is because of the activity that moved digital when we all had to be in our homes because of COVID?
Right. COVID, the pandemic had a lot to do with it. When a lot of us were stuck at home, we were spending a lot of money on tech goods and services, computers, phones, streaming services, even Netflix, which has been a tech darling for a long, long time. Its stock is down considerably this year. And I think that even though we haven't heard of a bunch of layoffs at Netflix, I'm seeing some chatter there that it is cutting in some divisions.
Well, there's so much competition there now, too, right? Netflix is not the only one that's in the game.
Yeah.
We've got so many other streaming platforms that are coming out.
Yeah.
So
everyone has, everyone has a lot of entertainment options. And then also because the pandemic is, some people have declared over, even though it's not, because we're not staying home as much, people are starting to spend on other things. Yeah.
So what are you going to be watching for over the next few months? Oh, and let me just mention, as a public service announcement here, that COVID levels are rising right now. We are seeing higher positive case returns than we had in the past. And so officials are warning of a winter surge. So, bear that in mind. All right. So, but back to what you're seeing on the economic picture and what you're expecting coming forward.
Well, I've been talking to VCs, just talking to people who observe the valley and know the valley. And things could be slow for a little bit. Recessions last a couple years, typically. And so if we're not in it but are about to approach it, the next couple years could be tough. And I just want to point out that it's not just going to be tough for these tech workers who are getting laid off, right? Like the engineers and the program managers, the people who can work from home. It's going to be tough for the people who are low-wage workers who help make Silicon Valley run, who help make these tech companies run, right? Like the janitors and the cafeteria workers and the security guards and the tech shuttle workers, they're getting laid off. And so if there are no people at the office, it's going to be tough for everyone. And small businesses, right? Small businesses that were relying on the business of these tech companies. It's going to be tough for them.
And we have major vacancy rates here in San Francisco as well. All right, let's turn to some of the propositions that you were covering. Prop 30, let's start there. This one was a tax on wealthier Californians, which was, that money was supposed to be used to fund our electric vehicle charging network that needs to be built as California moves towards green vehicles. That failed.
Right. Yeah, it did. And it was very interesting because it was backed mostly by Lyft, the ride-hailing company. And, it was about making sure that California is ready for the green, for electric vehicles to become mainstream. And Governor Newsom and a bunch of other Californians didn't want the additional taxes on the wealthy. And so they portrayed Lyft as sort of, this corporation that was trying to do a money grab. But so that was very interesting. And Lyft really did lose out. I mean, they spent $45 million out of the $48 million that was spent on that campaign. So,
and then Props 26 and 27, very quickly in the last few moments we have here, also failed. These are the twin sports betting measures.
Right. So Prop 26 was backed by the state's Native American tribes, and Prop 27 was backed by the casinos and the online betting companies. And they both failed by a lot. 80%, I think, for Prop 27 and 70% against Prop 26. And what it came down to was, I think, that a lot of Californians were turned off by the messaging. They both promised to help with homelessness, mental health, and gambling addiction. And I don't think voters bought that.
Just too big a promise, really, because those are big problems, intractable problems right now.
Right.
We're still looking for solutions. Levi Sumagaysay with MarketWatch, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks.
150 years ago, Lake Merritt became the nation's very first wildlife refuge. It's home to large populations of herons, egrets, geese, and ducks. Take a moment to refresh your spirits with this week's Something Beautiful, a visit to Lake Merritt in Oakland. That was my running spot when I moved to San Francisco, or the Bay Area, in 2005. It's a great spot. You should go check it out. That's the end of our show for tonight. It is Veterans Day, and we want to say a special thank you to all who have served in our nation's armed forces. You can find KQED Newsroom online or on Twitter, or email us at knr@kqed.org, and you can reach me on social media at Priya D. Clemens. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.